She was a black woman, walking alone through a dark parking garage at nearly midnight, and the men who should have protected her had just laughed her out the door. 3 years. 3 years of her blueprints, her calculations, her sleepless nights poured into glass facades and breathtaking spatial flows that made other people's careers, while she stood in the back of the room and smiled through it. And tonight, the night they finally celebrated the project she had built from nothing, her senior manager looked her in the eye, turned to his audience, and said, "Let the black girl walk in the dark." They laughed. She smiled, and she walked. What none of them knew, what no one in that lobby could have imagined, was that somewhere above them, on the 39th floor of that same building, a man was already listening. A man whose name appeared in federal investigation files. A man who had built an empire on the principle that patience, applied with precision, is the most devastating force available to a human being. A Korean Mafia boss, sitting in silence, watching her walk toward a threat she didn't know had been arranged in advance. He said one word to his security team. One word. And 2 bulletproof SUVs were already running. What happened next didn't just save her life. It dismantled every single person who had spent 3 years pretending she was invisible. Quietly, completely, without a single raised voice. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click Join to become a member and help our channel. There are nights that don't announce themselves. No storm on the horizon. No warning in the air. Just a Friday evening in late autumn, the kind that smells like cold concrete and ambition slowly curdling into exhaustion. Chicago moved the way it always does after dark. Indifferent, efficient, already forgetting the people still inside its buildings. Jordan Renee Whitfield stood in the elevator of the 42nd floor, watching the lobby numbers count down. Her blazer was perfectly pressed, her afro full and unhurried. Her expression, the one she had spent years calibrating, present enough to be professional, distant enough to survive. She had worn it through 3 years of watching her blueprints become other people's legacies. 3 years of raising her hand in rooms where the credit landed a few seats to her left. Tonight had been the formal celebration of the Meridian Tower project, the most ambitious residential development the firm had commissioned in a decade. The glass facade had been her idea. The load-bearing asymmetry? Her calculation. The spatial flow that the client had called breathtaking at the unveiling. Her vision, drafted on her own time, refined across 14-hour days she had never been compensated for overtime. The name on the presentation slide had not been hers. She had smiled through the champagne toast. She had shaken hands. She had said, "Thank you," when someone told her she must be proud to have contributed to such a project. And she had felt something quietly close behind her chest. Not grief, exactly. Something older than grief. The practiced silence of someone who has learned that outrage without power is just noise. The lobby opened. The night security guard nodded without looking up. The parking garage entrance was 40 feet to the left, down a corridor where 2 of the overhead lights had been flickering for 11 days. Facilities had been notified. No one had come. She had asked Marcus Heller, her senior manager, for a security escort. It was a simple request. The firm had a protocol for exactly this situation. What she received instead was the particular kind of cruelty that dresses itself as humor, the kind that only lands when there is an audience willing to laugh. "Let the black girl walk in the dark," he said. and the cluster of colleagues around him had done what people do when power makes a joke. They laughed just enough to confirm it. Jordan had not flinched. She had smiled, slightly, in that way of hers that everyone misread. She picked up her caramel bag, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and walked toward the stairwell. What no one in that lobby understood, what no one had the imagination to consider, was that the building they were standing in was not simply an office tower. It was, on its 39th floor, also home to a satellite gallery of Kwon Arts, one of the most quietly influential private art institutions on the East Coast. And its owner, a man whose name appeared in no public records tied to the firm, whose stake in the parent company had been structured through 3 layers of holding entities, was still in the building. Kwon Jae-hyun had been finishing a meeting that ran 40 minutes long. He was a man who did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He had built everything he owned on the principle that patience, applied with precision, was the most devastating force available to a person. He was walking toward his private elevator when Min-soo's voice came through the earpiece. Low, measured, the tone reserved for things that required attention without alarm. The parking garage. Sublevel 2. A woman. 3 men who had no reason to be there. Kwon stopped walking. He did not ask questions. He had learned long ago that questions were for people who needed to convince themselves. He already knew what he was going to do. He had known the moment he heard what was said in that lobby, caught on an audio feed he had never been meant to hear, from a security system that technically belonged to him. He said one word. The SUVs were already running. 11:51. There are sounds a parking garage makes when it is empty that a person only truly learns after years of walking through them alone. The particular echo of heels on poured concrete. The way fluorescent hum fills the absence of conversation. The small, involuntary calibrations the body makes. Shoulders tightening, pace lengthening. Keys already between fingers before the conscious mind has issued any instruction. Jordan was on the 2nd sublevel when she heard the footsteps behind her. Not 1 set. 3. She did not turn around. Turning around was information given freely, and she had learned not to give anything freely in spaces where the terms were not hers to set. She counted the distance to her car instead. 40 meters. 38. The footsteps were not rushing, which was somehow worse than if they had been. Unhurried pursuit carries a specific kind of confidence. The confidence of men who have never had to account for what happens next. She reached into her bag without breaking stride. Her fingers found her keys, found her phone. She pressed the home button and the screen lit up. And in that fraction of a second she saw the reflection in the dark glass of a support column. 3 figures, spread slightly, closing the distance with the casual patience of people who had done this before, or believed they could. 29 meters. The lights went out. Not a flicker, not a gradual fade. Every fluorescent panel in sublevel 2 extinguished simultaneously, the way only a deliberate cut to the main line produces, and the darkness that replaced them was absolute. The compressed, total blackness of underground spaces with no secondary source, no windows, no ambient city light bleeding through. Jordan stopped. She controlled her breathing. In for 4. Out for 4. The footsteps behind her had also stopped, which meant they were listening for her. And she understood then with complete clarity that this was not random. The timing, the lights, the tunus she had not yet discovered. None of this was coincidental. She was about to move, had calculated the angle toward the emergency exit she had memorized weeks ago, the way she memorized all exits in all parking structures because she had learned to, when the headlights came. 2 pairs, simultaneous, flooding the entire corridor of sub-level 2 with a force that turned the darkness into something almost violent in its reversal. The sound arrived a half-second later. 2 heavy engines, moving in controlled formation, tires precise on concrete. Not racing, not aggressive, simply inevitable. The 2 black Suburbans entered from opposite ends of the corridor and came to a stop in a configuration that required no explanation. They did not park. They positioned. The geometry of it was deliberate. Jordan between them, the 3 men behind her now separated from her by 4,000 pounds of reinforced steel on each side. The doors opened. 4 men in dark clothing took positions without a word exchanged among them. They did not look at Jordan. They looked at the 3 men in the dark. And that distinction, the direction of their attention, communicated everything about who the threat assessment had already been made for. The 3 men did not stay to find out what came next. Footsteps receding. Then nothing. One rear door of the second SUV opened, and Kwon Jae-hyun stepped out. In the wash of the headlights, the tattoo on his neck was clearly visible. The dragon climbing from collar to jaw in traditional ink, the kind that takes years to complete, and announces, to those who know how to read it, a history that predates every suit and gallery and holding company. He stood at a distance that was respectful without being uncertain. His hands were at his sides. He looked at her the way very few people had ever looked at Jordan Renee Whitfield. Without assessment. Without the slight, involuntary recalculation that happened in people's eyes when they were deciding what category to place her in. He simply looked.
"You're all right?" he said.
Not quite a question. More like the verbal equivalent of checking a measurement twice. Jordan held her ground. Her pulse was still elevated, but her face had returned to that calibrated stillness, the one that had carried her through 3 years of rooms that underestimated her. "Who are you?" she said. He did not answer immediately. He reached into his jacket, the movement slow, visible, deliberate, and produced a card. No logo, no title. A number, hand-printed, in ink that suggested permanence. Min-soo crossed the distance and offered it to her. She took it without looking away from Kwon.
"Someone who heard what was said to you upstairs," Kwon said. "And someone whose cameras work."
Jordan looked at the card, at the SUVs, at the men standing in their positions with the stillness of people who did exactly what they were told and nothing else. She looked back at him.
"The cars will take you home," he said. "That's not a request."
Something in the phrasing, not threatening, not gentle, simply factual in the way that only genuine authority can be, made her jaw tighten slightly. She had spent her entire career navigating men who believed their position entitled them to determine her movements. "I have my own car," she said.
"I know," he said. "3rd corridor, 10th space on the left. Both rear tires."
She looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she turned and walked to the 3rd corridor. The tires were destroyed. Clean cuts. Not vandalism. Work. She stood there in the cold, concrete dark, back to him, hand resting on the roof of her car, and she allowed herself exactly 4 seconds to feel the full weight of what had just almost happened, and what it meant that it had been prepared in advance, and what it said about the people who had laughed in the lobby an hour ago. Then she put the card in her bag, walked back to the SUV, and got in without another word. The door closed. The cars moved, and somewhere in the controlled silence of that armored interior, between the smell of leather and cold air and the city lights beginning to streak past the tinted windows, Jordan Renee Whitfield pulled out her phone and typed 2 words into a search engine. The results loaded. She read them. She put the phone face down on her lap and looked at the ceiling of the car for a long time. 11:52. The city passed outside the window in the way it only does when you are no longer moving through it, but being carried. Passive, observant, temporarily removed from the friction of your own life. Jordan watched the south side materialize through tinted glass, the familiar corners and lit storefronts, and the particular quality of streetlight on winter pavement that she had grown up inside of. And she felt something she could not immediately name. Not gratitude, not quite. Something more complicated. The feeling of having been protected by a force you did not ask for, in a way you could not refuse. By someone whose protection came attached to a history that the search results on her phone had outlined in careful, sparse language. The kind of language journalists use when they are certain of what they know, but uncertain of what they can prove. Kwon Jae-hyun, 41 years old, CEO of Kwon Arts, a private gallery network operating across Manhattan, Miami, and Chicago. No criminal record in any jurisdiction. Named in 2 federal investigations, neither of which had produced charges. Associated, the articles used that word with the specific caution it deserves, with the Kwon Organization, a Korean criminal network whose operations across the eastern seaboard had been the subject of a Department of Justice task force disbanded in 2019 for insufficient evidence. Insufficient evidence. She read that phrase 3 times. The SUV stopped in front of her building. The driver did not speak. The door did not open automatically. One of the suited men outside opened it, and Jordan stepped onto the sidewalk of her own street, feeling, for a reason she could not fully articulate, that the coordinates of her life had shifted slightly without her permission. She did not sleep well. By 3 in the morning, she was at her drafting table, not drawing, just sitting with the card in her hand. No logo, no name, just a number in permanent ink. Turning it between her fingers, the way you turn a thing when you are trying to decide whether it is a door or a wall. She thought about Marcus Heller's face when he made the joke. The particular ease of it. The way he had not even looked at her directly when he said it, because she had not required his attention in order to be diminished. She thought about 3 years of projects, 14-hour days, client presentations she had prepared and watched someone else deliver. The Meridian Tower, the glass facade, the load-bearing asymmetry that a partner had described in a meeting, word for word as his own intuition. She thought about what it meant that a man she had never met, a man whose name appeared in federal task force documentation, had sent armored cars because someone in a lobby had told her to walk in the dark. She put the card in the inside pocket of her caramel bag, where she kept the things she was not ready to decide about. Monday arrived the way Mondays do after Fridays that have rearranged something fundamental. Ordinary on the surface, altered underneath. Jordan arrived at the firm at 8:43. She wore charcoal wide-leg trousers and a cream turtleneck and her glasses, the thick-rimmed ones that people had told her made her look severe, which was precisely why she wore them when she needed the room to understand something without being told. She did not know, as she stepped off the elevator onto the 31st floor, that 40 minutes earlier, a building courier had delivered 2 envelopes to the offices of Marcus Heller and the firm's executive director, Carolyn Marsh, simultaneously. She did not know that Marcus Heller had opened his envelope at his desk and sat without moving for 6 minutes after reading its contents. That he had then closed it placed it inside his briefcase, and stared at the surface of his desk the way a man stares at something when the floor beneath him has just become unreliable. She did not know that Carolyn Marsh had recognized the letterhead inside her envelope. Not a name, not a logo, but a specific cream-colored stalk with a watermark that she had seen once before, years ago, during the firm's initial capitalization round, and that the recognition had produced in her a very particular kind of stillness that her assistant, passing in the hallway, later described as the look of someone who had just been told the temperature of a room they were already standing in. What was in the envelopes was not a threat. Threats require the possibility of negotiation, and what Kwon Jae-hyun sent did not negotiate. It documented security footage from sub-level 2, time-stamped and unedited. Identification records for the 3 men, 2 of whom had prior charges for aggravated assault, both of whom had financial ties traceable through 3 transaction layers to a competing architecture firm currently in litigation with Meridian Tower's parent company over stolen design specifications. A litigation, the documentation noted with quiet precision, in which the stolen specifications in question bore a remarkable structural resemblance to the preliminary drawings submitted internally by Jordan Renee Whitfield, 14 months before the competing firm's filing. The documentation did not say what should be done with this information. It simply existed, complete, irrefutable, delivered to exactly the people who needed to understand what they were now holding. And beneath everything, in both envelopes, a single handwritten line on that cream-colored stalk. The same ink, the same permanence as the card still sitting inside a caramel bag on the 31st floor. She built what you sold. You will correct that. Not a request. Jordan spent that morning in a project review meeting, unaware of any of it, presenting preliminary drawings for a municipal contract she had been assigned as a secondary contributor. She presented clearly. She answered questions directly. She did not soften her language or qualify her expertise. When a colleague interrupted her twice in 11 minutes, she waited for him to finish and then continued from exactly the word where she had stopped, without acknowledging the interruption, which was a technique she had developed over 3 years as the most efficient way to make a room understand something without requiring their agreement. By noon, Carolyn Marsh had called an emergency session of the Senior Leadership Committee. Jordan did not know this either. She ate lunch at her desk. She worked. She did not check her phone until 2:17, when a message from an unknown number arrived. No greeting, no signature. Just 7 words. Check your firm's internal portal. This afternoon. She stared at the message. Then she put her phone down. Then she picked it up again. Then she opened the portal. The notification was dated that morning, sent at 11:52, while she had been in the project review meeting, presenting drawings to a room that had interrupted her twice and credited her with nothing. It sat in the internal portal under the category marked Personnel Actions, Senior Leadership, which was not a category Jordan had ever had reason to monitor, because nothing in that category had ever had anything to do with her. Until now. She read it once. Then she closed the portal. Then she opened it again and read it a second time, slowly. The way you read something when your mind is insisting that your eyes have made an error. Effective immediately. Jordan Renee Whitfield, promotion to Senior Architect, Principal Track. Retroactive credit assignment pending review of projects submitted under firm letterhead, fiscal years 2022 through 2024. Compensation adjustment. Immediate. Full committee vote. Unanimous. Unanimous. She sat with that word for a long time. She knew every person on that committee. She knew which ones had been in the lobby on Friday. She knew which ones had left. Unanimous. She closed her laptop. She stood up. She walked to the window of the 31st floor and looked out at Chicago the way you look at a city when something inside you has just been confirmed. Not given, confirmed. And the confirmation is complicated because it has arrived through a door you did not open yourself and cannot fully account for. Marcus Heller's office was empty by 3 o'clock. His assistant told anyone who asked that he had a personal matter. By 4:15, HR had received a formal letter of resignation, effective immediately, citing personal reasons. No negotiation, no counteroffer requested. The kind of exit that happens when a man understands, with complete precision, that the walls of the room he has been standing in have always belonged to someone else. Jordan did not learn this until the following morning. That night, she went home the same way she always did. Train, 2 blocks, the corner store for sparkling water, the stairs because the elevator in her building ran slow. She made dinner. She sat at her drafting table. She took the card out of the inside pocket of her caramel bag and held it under the lamp for a long time, looking at the number in permanent ink, thinking about what it meant to receive a debt you did not ask for from a person you did not know, whose own reasons for paying it were tangled in something dark and old and private. She called the number on the 3rd day. He answered on the 2nd ring. No greeting, just the particular quality of silence that indicated he had been expecting it.
"You're a silent partner," she said. Not a question.
3 years, he said. You knew about the projects. A pause.
I knew about a pattern. I had a report. I read it. I did nothing, at the time.
She absorbed that, the honesty of it, the absence of justification. Why? She said. Another pause. Longer. The kind that arrives when a person is deciding not whether to tell the truth, but how much of it to carry into the open. My sister was 24, he said. She was walking home from a 2nd shift. No one sent a car. No one thought to. His voice did not change in tone or temperature. It remained exactly as measured as everything else about him, which somehow made it worse. Which somehow made it true. I have spent a significant portion of my life arranging things so that certain outcomes do not repeat. I do not always succeed. Friday, I did. Jordan did not speak for a moment. Outside her window, the city was doing what it always did. Moving, indifferent, already forgetting. The men in the garage, she said finally. The ones who ran. They will not be a problem. She did not ask what that meant. She understood, with the part of herself that had always been clear-eyed about the distance between the world as it was explained and the world as it operated, that there were categories of resolution she was not meant to inquire into, that the protection she had received lived in a moral geography that was not simple and was not clean, and was not something she could accept without remainder. I don't know what I owe you, she said. You don't owe me anything, he said immediately. The speed of it told her he had thought about this. What was corrected at the firm was a debt the firm owed you. I accelerated the collection. That's a different thing. She looked at the card in her hand, the number, the ink. The handwritten line, she said. In the envelopes. She built what you sold. You will correct that. A long silence. Yes, he said. That wasn't about the parking garage. No, he said. It wasn't. She set the card down on the drafting table, parallel to a set of preliminary drawings she had been refining. A municipal library branch, her design, her name on the file, her call whether it stayed that way. "I'm going to stay at the firm," she said. "For now. On my terms."
"That seems right," he said.
"I'm not going to pretend Friday didn't happen."
"I wouldn't expect you to."
"And I'm not going to pretend I understand what you are."
The pause that followed was different from the others. Quieter. More considered.
When he spoke, his voice carried something that was not quite vulnerability, but lived in the same neighborhood.
"Neither do I," he said. "Some days."
She almost said something, decided against it. Some truths land better in the space between words than inside them. She thanked him. Simply, without elaboration. The way you thank someone when the gratitude is real, but the situation does not permit the full weight of it. He said nothing in return, which she was beginning to understand was its own kind of acknowledgement. She hung up. She put the card back in the inside pocket of the caramel bag, where she kept the things she was still deciding about. Because she realized, still deciding. Not about him, not exactly. About what it meant to be protected by a force that lived outside every institution that had ever failed her. About what it cost. About whether the cost was different when the protection was real. Outside, Chicago moved through its evening with its usual indifference. The Meridian Tower, her glass facade, her asymmetry, her breathtaking spatial flow, caught the last of the winter light and threw it across the skyline in long, cold angles. Her name was not on it yet, but it would be on the next one. She opened her drafting table drawer, took out a fresh sheet, and began to draw. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever poured everything you had into something? Your time, your talent, your sleepless nights, only to watch someone else take the credit and walk away, while you stood there and smiled because you had no other choice? Have you ever been dismissed, overlooked, or told, in words or in silence, that the dark was where you belonged, by the very people who were supposed to see you? And when protection finally came, did it arrive from the place you expected? Or did it come from somewhere that surprised you? Someone who understood your pain not because they were told about it, but because they had carried their own version of it for years. Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and the quiet power of being underestimated, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click Join to become a part of our community and help the channel.